Well, hello. Today's question for the yes or no treatment is: were monasteries worthwhile? And here, of course, I'm talking about medieval monasteries, not the modern ones, which are kind of in decline. They're trying very hard to recruit, but they certainly aren't what they were in their heyday in the Middle Ages. So, what about monasteries? How did all that start? How did we get to the point where they were so powerful that Henry VIII decided to close them and grab all their stuff? um, well, it's a religious tradition and custom that really started in the desert in Egypt and Judean desert and so forth, way back in the second, third centuries. But it got really organized under Benedict in Norcia, who founded the Benedictine order, of which most of the monasteries here in Britain belong. It really got quite a boost when St. Augustine came to Britain in 597 and started what is now Canterbury Cathedral, a Benedictine house. And monasteries had their kind of ups and downs, grew during the Anglo-Saxon period, and then had their big boost after the Norman conquest, when the Normans brought in French churchmen, men to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, architects and stonemasons to build the great cathedrals, and the order certainly flourished. Here in Canterbury, we've had Austin friars, we've had Franciscans, Benedictines, Augustinians, and at one point they were the monasteries owned about a third of the land in Britain. They certainly owned most of Canterbury. So they were really a powerful force. Things they reached their peak probably in the 12th and 13th centuries. The Black Death really decimated their numbers in the middle of the 14th century, and of course they came to an end in the 1530s and 40s under Henry VIII, when he dissolved the monasteries and took all their wealth. So that's kind of where we are. They had a huge impact on Britain. So what we're going to talk about in this video is whether that was a good thing, whether that was worthwhile or not. Okay, well, let's start with those who would say yes. Number one, they were worthwhile. Well, of course, the monasteries here and in England in general had a huge effect on the intellectual and education and cultural life of the nation. They were organizations that really employed the only educated people. As such, they took it upon themselves to be scholarly, to record, translate, and look after the great works of classical literature. Perhaps without them, we wouldn't have many of those that we have now. So that was certainly worthwhile. With their books, they created great libraries. They were artistic. The stained glass windows that were created were masterpieces of not only craftsmanship but artistic insight as well. Here in Canterbury, the windows that depict the old Bible stories and the alleged miracles of the pilgrims that came to venerate Thomas Becket are just astounding. Really worth a visit to Canterbury and the cathedral just to see those windows. Of course, their artistry in the architecture of these great cathedrals is just absolutely stupendous. When you look at them and realize what fantastic engineering feats they were, the huge height and complexity of these buildings. There were a few vicissitudes, a few fell down maybe, a few towers fell down, but for the most part they were robust, they lasted, And as both an architectural and engineering accomplishment, they were just amazing. The monasteries also provided education. They educated young people, mostly young boys, throughout the Middle Ages. They provided medical services. They were only hospital in town usually. If you had an ailment, you weren't going to go and ring up the local GP because there wasn't any. It was the monastery or nothing. Next, they advanced science. Agriculture, not for nothing, Kent is called the Garden of England, and much of that arose from the experiments and initiatives of the monks. Apiculture, bees, they kept bees. They did a lot with bees and the whole science and practice of beekeeping. Herbiculture, the whole use of herb gardens for both the delectation of the monks' food, but as well as for medicine. So they advanced a lot of useful domestic type sciences that we are still benefiting from. The monks were dedicated people. They were spiritual. Their principal function was to pray. They underwent a pretty rigorous schedule, 8 services a day, including one at 2 o'clock in the morning. Their devotion to their faith and to their rituals and so forth was what nowadays we would call astounding. Of course, you can wonder whether some of them didn't even fall asleep during the 2 o'clock service, but nonetheless, it was there. That was their central function, particularly the enclosed monasteries. The friaries were more involved in the outside world and so forth, but those who were cloistered within were principally focused on prayer. And then finally, they gave alms. They provided help to the poor and destitute in their communities. There is even a term for one of the monks who is in charge of giving alms. He's the almoner. So all in all, there was not only cultural and intellectual achievement and benefit from having the monasteries, but they provided valuable services to the community in terms of charity and education and health and so forth. So, they had a lot to offer, and they really did a lot of good things for the community. Well, what about those that say, no, they really weren't worthwhile? I suppose one of the biggest objections really is the incredible wealth that they amassed. When you think of what they were supposed to be there for, to pray, to live lives of dedication to the ideas of Christ, to austerity, and so forth, they perhaps kind of lost sight of that when they began erecting these enormous, complex, elaborate, stunning buildings, particularly the cathedrals. What was all that for? Why did they need to build a bigger building than the next monastery? That kind of competition kind of strikes a little bit of hubris, self-aggrandizement, that kind of thing. Not very Christ-like, really. A second argument for the idea that they really weren't worthwhile, and this would go over quite big nowadays, I think, they were clearly an elitist institution. For instance, when novices came into the monastery, they not only, of course, had to demonstrate some level of intellectual ability, but they really had to kind of buy their way in. So it took an affluent family it took someone of social position really to put their sons and, in some cases, daughters into monasteries. And that was kind of discrimination against the poor. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they shall see God, and all that. I guess they sort of forgot about that part of it. Another argument against the monasteries was that they heavily promoted the notion of relics, pieces of the body, particularly of saints and even Jesus Christ, who were which were made available on show in cathedral churches, those abbey churches, priory churches, which eventually became cathedrals, to attract visitors, to attract contributors. It became a kind of a possibly bogus endeavor. A lot of these relics that were claimed to be part of someone's body probably weren't. There have been a few famous examples. At Glastonbury Abbey, one of the buried relics that was supposed to be one of the early archbishops turned out to be that of a goose upon scientific examination. So it all had the kind of odor of con and deception about it. That's not too good either. And then finally, there was obviously some corrupt, licentious behavior from time to time in the monasteries. The commissioners of Henry VIII, under the leadership of Cromwell, did a kind of an audit of all of the assets of the monasteries leading up to the dissolution and the seizure of all of their properties. And in the process, and as part of the justification for the dissolution, they confirmed this bad behavior. Now, some of it was probably exaggerated, even made up in order to justify the king's actions, but perhaps a lot more of it wasn't. So there was a kind of unpleasant aspect of bad behavior and licentious behavior, and the kind of thing was, who knows what those monks are up to. So anyway, those are the negative arguments. What's my take? What's my take on all this? Well, over the course of the history of monasticism, certainly in Britain and in Europe, there was a kind of a predictable cycle. The monastery would flourish. It would benefit from a lot of bequests from people hoping to go to heaven. And of course, there wasn't any problem of dividing up the spoils after people died, because it all belonged to the monastery. And so they got richer and richer. And then eventually someone would decide that was not on. Sometimes it would be reforming orders that said these Benedictines are getting too fat. I think we should start a new order like the Cluniacs and the Cistercians and so forth. Or it could be raiders. The Vikings came in and smashed up a lot of monasteries. They certainly did that at Lindisfarne and Holy Island up north in Northumberland. So there's a kind of a predictability to these things. If you get too rich, somebody's going to notice that and come after it. And that's eventually what led to their demise under Henry VIII. He wouldn't have bothered if they were all poor. So that's a kind of an unpleasant aspect of it. On the other hand, they did a lot culturally, artistically. They preserved knowledge. They were organizations that provided a lot of valuable services to the community, which the nation had to replace after they were gone. So net, my position is, yes, they were worthwhile, subject to a couple of niggles. Okay, so there you are. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, give me a like, hit the notification bell, subscribe, please, make comments, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.